Hey, and welcome to another episode of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Phil Sellers, Practice Director here at XenTegra for Modern Data Center. And, Nutanix Weekly is one of many podcasts we produce here at XenTegra. We like to call it Content with Context. We review different blog posts and things all around the internet with our partners and try to bring the real world flavor to it. And bringing that flavor today, I've got a couple of guests, co-hosts with me. We've got Jirah Cox from Nutanix. Jirah, how are you doing today?
Doing good, man. How are you?
Doing well. It's funny. I introduce you every time on this podcast, and I don't ever quite know the title, so I don't ever say your title. What is your title at Nutanix? What is your official title?
I'm a principal architect.
Okay, principal architect. See, that's easy enough. I can probably say that.
Oh, I'm all about easy.
But a lot of what you do is getting out on the road, working with customers. You talk in front of groups, somewhat like a field CTO. Is that appropriate?
Totally. I mean, if you want more words, I often say I'm a principal architect on our field CTO team covering the Americas.
That's a mouthful. So
Yeah.
yes.
See, simplest possible solution first, and then, justify more complexity.
There we go. We're also joined with a brand new team member here at XenTegra, but not new to the Nutanix space at all, Chris Calhoun. Chris, how are you today?
Fantastic. Definitely feeling good about joining this crew today. Obviously have connections to both and appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, Chris, we're happy to have you. Chris just joined the team here at XenTegra as a solutions architect. Spent some time with Nutanix, spent time on the customer side as well. So super happy to have you here and helping our customers. So like my first week at XenTegra, this is Chris's first week, and we've got him on a podcast. So hopefully that's a good track record for you, buddy.
Absolutely. Feet to the fire. Let's do it.
Well, as I said, we like to bring content with context. And so today's content is a blog post on the Nutanix blogs. It says Nutanix expands support for vSAN ready nodes. And I was out at Nutanix.next. I think, Jirah, you were there as well. There were some announcements around this back in May, June timeframe. I can't remember when .next was now.
It was May, right? I should know this. We were there. It wasn't March, right? It was one of the M's.
But this was one of the big announcements, right? Reuse of hardware.
Huge.
There were multiple different announcements around being able to reuse existing hardware. This has been something that's a consistent request from customers to Nutanix. And it's somewhere where there wasn't a ton of flexibility in the past, but we're definitely becoming much more flexible. So I'm really interested to dig in here today and talk about vSAN ready nodes. For anybody listening that doesn't know what a vSAN ready node is, Jirah, can you kind of give us a quick synopsis of what is a vSAN ready node?
Sure. Great question. So I'm not reading from a dictionary here, but off the top of my head, a vSAN ready node, right, is a node purchased for the purpose of getting a factory pre-installed experience of hypervisor plus software-defined storage fabric that you can then use to usually commonly run, of course, the vSphere stack.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important, like it's qualified hardware for that specific stack. So certain components, certain processors and RAM and configurations that make it really well suited for running the vSphere with vSAN stack. It sounds eerily familiar or similar to VxRail, but it's not the same thing as VxRail. That's a much more holistic, lifecycle managed appliance type form factor. So these are just more of validated hardware designs, I guess. Is that safe to say?
Yeah. Is it more like is it like a kit car where all the pieces are meant to work together, but they might just not come fully, completely assembled?
I like that analogy. I like that analogy a lot.
This is why I joined.
Yeah, you trademark it, right? Get paid every time.
You invite me for the analogies. That's why I'm here. I know my role.
So again, reuse. one of the hallmarks of HCI, Nutanix as a stack and as a solution, is the ability to lifecycle, the ability to do upgrades easily. And part of that has been, a pretty defined HCL. So are we just basically expanding upon that HCL? Is that essentially what we're doing here, or is there a little more at play?
I think there's a bit more to it. We have, of course, had, to your point, a very opinionated design for how to run our software stack, because we really were sort of only interested in giving customers A++ experiences, right? If we look at other times in the industry, other flavors of storage in the industry, we've seen places and times where certain kinds of bring these parts together, they should all just work as the promise, and then customers go to deploy it. Find that certain things don't quite match up with their expectations, or maybe failure handling modes get more, let's say, interesting than they really should be. We want boring, predictable failure handling really all the time for all customers. And so then even certain parts would come off of certain vendors' HCLs, right? So we don't want our customers to ever have the experience of should work, works on paper, you buy it, try it out, let us know how it goes. We only want customers, for the most part, if it's our most opinionated designs, running on hardware that we also run in our labs, that we're doing full regression testing on. To your point, that we offer that full lifecycle experience on of really driving down that cost of time and care and feeding of a certain platform down as low as possible, right? Like 0 is probably never going to be realistic, but how much time can we give back to our admins as they run our platform to do stuff like firmware updates, BIOS patching, NIC firmware, disk firmware, things like that nature, right? Things where there's really, usually I describe it to practitioners as it's kind of a zero-sum game. Like, you never will get a pat on the back. If you do it perfectly, no one even knows you did it. And if someone does find out you are doing firmware maintenance because they noticed it, it's because they noticed it in a bad way, right? So there's never a great outcome for being the excellent disk firmware applier at your day job. So the more we make that invisible, the more time you get back, and it just works. And we want kind of boring outcomes. That being said, we've talked about it on this podcast, as customers are in this broad, I want to adopt more Nutanix motion, but let's say I've already owned and purchased hardware for other purposes in the past, how much of that can we reuse, right? Are they willing to accept other outcomes that maybe might not include the exact same LCM experience, but they can, run that hardware more sooner. That's not good grammar. To get the outcome deployed there, is the migration itself more important than I want the full stack, best possible Nutanix experience? I'm willing to maybe compromise on LCM experiences or firmware patching because I have other priorities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, I'm curious, I have to think there's a lot of customers asking for this expansion, this reuse of hardware, because it opens up the Nutanix goodness, even if maybe you're not aligned with a hardware refresh cycle. What's it kind of been like as you've talked to customers and looked at these sorts of things? What have they been asking you for?
Great question. And this kind of parallels with what Nutanix has done in the past, as far as listening to customer asks, customer needs, customer wants. And this announcement goes hand in hand with that, because to me, this is something that, as the need for technology changes, or moving away from a vSAN ready node to get prepared for a migration of some sort to, hey, how can we best use the existing investment in our hardware? Nutanix has done a good job listening and staying with that hardware compatibility list, that they extend it to a situation like this where it's similar type technology, but really the focus from the customer perspective is, yes, we want it. Yes, we need it. How can we get the Nutanix goodness in a faster way without actually having to budget for a full total tech refresh from hardware? So from a customer perspective, I think it makes sense to consider this route of, hey, look, if there's a small project where we can pull some of these ready nodes away from that to look at Nutanix as a suitable offering, I think that that's a fantastic opportunity to take some of that Nutanix goodness.
Yeah, and the blog goes on to say, understanding vSAN ready nodes and Nutanix integration, this isn't a shocking sort of repurposing. vSAN ready nodes have a lot of similar components. They have similar underpinnings, I guess, of what a Nutanix HCI node needs. And so being able to certify these, blog says, was pretty easy. Relative ease is the way it's said here. That probably has a lot to do with the fact that we're not talking about every possible SSD in the world, every possible PCI card and variety of PCI cards being plugged into these. This was already a somewhat scoped HCL in the vSAN sort of realm. So I'm sure that had a lot to do with how quickly this was able to happen and come to market for customers.
Totally. If you'll pardon one more strained analogy, like on a spectrum of like hammer to Play-Doh, you have like the useful appliance that has no configurability whatsoever, right? But therefore yields the most reliability and the most predictability. And that's historically been what we've prioritized, right? We're not going all the way full Play-Doh on the spectrum of like, it's so configurable, it can be anything, including terrible things, and not always useful. But it's maybe one step in that direction of let's be a little bit more flexible than our traditional approach of like, let's have a pretty narrow offering that we guarantee is going to always work amazing.
Well, I know what I'm buying, Jirah, for Christmas now. It is a hammer to Play-Doh Spectrum art piece. So
if you see the shirts, those are going to be very limited time offerings.
But it's a great analogy, though, right? I mean, a hammer's built for a specific purpose. If you tried to smack a nail with Play-Doh, I don't know that it's going to be so effective. So it was built for a specific purpose. These are very similarly built hammers, and so it makes it an easy thing to adopt. Um, in terms of reusing hardware, what are some of the advantages here that the blog post kind of goes through? First of all, one, the adaptability, I guess, is an advantage. But there's also another one called out here in terms of total cost of ownership.
I think it's huge. It's really primarily I would call it the driving factor, right? Of please help me find a way to not need to fully discount, early retire recent investments.
Yeah, absolutely.
From a customer perspective, of course, you want to try to time your new technology around refresh, where something's EOL. Well, that's not really a concern now in this case. You can continue down the path of the hardware that you're using and continue the use of that with the Nutanix Advantage.
Well, and this is a core tenet. We talk about simplicity and automation as tenets, but choice is another huge tenet of the Nutanix system. And so this is another one of those places where you're providing flexible and, as the blog says, future-proof solutions, where you're allowing choice. This is just another way of allowing customers choice in the way that they deploy the Nutanix software. Because the goodness of all this comes back down to that software layer that is the same no matter what substrate it's placed onto. The blog goes on to talk about a little bit of your history. And if we talk about this, I know you did a good job of kind of summing this up earlier, I think, Jirah, but you did very tightly integrated hardware development cycles, pretty narrow HCL. Beyond customer requests, was there other things that kind of brought this about or, helped you to kind of change your strategy around this?
I think in my opinion, I'd say the strategy is fundamentally unchanged. We always want to be as responsive to customer needs and requests as is reasonably possible, and good for Nutanix, good for the customer, good for the platform and the brand. there could be times and certain compelling events, right, when we have certain amounts of customer demand that make us revisit certain things or maybe change up the roadmap or the prioritization there. Not a fundamentally different strategy in some ways, and also in the historical look back here, right? Fundamentally, we were a bit more of an appliance company, closer to that launch in 2011, compared to where we are now as really pure software, right? So once we complete that transition to being pure software company, where we of course need to run on great hardware, but we don't fundamentally, you can look at our either our quarterly publishings or even how we build the company. It's not really fundamentally around incentivizing that hardware sale. We just need hardware somewhere that you get in some fashion, right? Whether from us or from another great partner, or from, in this case, now being able to reuse it. So we're now free really to think about and get a bit more flexible in this kind of area.
Now, you mentioned, somewhat maybe compromising that lifecycle management. Is that the case with the solution? Are there some things that maybe aren't there from a lifecycle management, or with these particular announcements, are we still able to fully benefit from LCM?
So it's my understanding that you will continue to patch these as traditional, in this case, mostly Dell or even HP servers, right? Which we actually have made easier along the way as well, right? You can now put a Nutanix node, even running AHV and running our software-defined storage in maintenance mode, right, with one click in the browser in Prism there. So then that makes it even more easy to, even though I have a resilient distributed cluster, to still say, I want to do maintenance on node 5 today, right? Patch it, bring it up to speed, and then bring it back into the cluster there.
Yeah, so still automated, so still that workflowed, simplified sort of process, maybe just not quite as automated.
Yes, yeah, still simple, with maybe a bit more interaction with the admin for the actual hardware firmware patching itself.
Yeah. So the next section of the blog talks about streamlining the migration process. Chris, I'm going to kind of push this one over to you. What are some of the benefits and stuff of the migration process? Because we're talking about the life cycle of it, but we have to get there first. So migration is pretty important also.
Absolutely. And that's, again, something that Nutanix prides itself on, is simplicity as far as designing a path and creating a path for customers to recognize and see that solution come to fruition and experience the goodness in a faster way. And that's really where Nutanix uptime and resiliency is really key to the product itself, is being able to rely on that software-defined solution where hardware is really a non-issue. So that's part of the first key bullet point there listed in the blog post. And that's something that to me is an advantage to, as a former customer, I can speak to, is knowing that the benefits come from the solution and the hardware is definitely a quality piece of that. But it's really the simplified management, which is the next bullet point that's highlighted there, of a unified platform, including the software stack for compute, storage, and networking all in one. That's the bread and butter of the Nutanix goodness. And then, of course, last of all is being able to run the demanding workloads. And I know that this is something that that Jirah has emphasized in past statements of Nutanix is ready to run today's workloads and future workloads. And that's really the benefit to the Nutanix platform. It's seeing into the future. It's investing in quality products now with customer choice of the gear, but in this case, being able to be flexible enough to adapt and move from a vSAN to a Nutanix node. That's really where the flexibility comes in, and the benefit for the customer is really key. And it's a great announcement as far as the forward-thinking approach that Nutanix has for this.
And the cool thing is, I mean, for most customers, right, this hardware that we're talking about here, it wasn't sitting in a warehouse, right, waiting for deployment. It was actually already running workloads, running the business. So what's really cool here is these customers are going to get a front row seat to really, drinking the champagne along with us around saying, yeah, we want to run great hardware. You're going to have a like for like hardware experience here. They're actually going to have some of the most clearest proof points around, yeah, I used to run it on that stack and now I run it on Nutanix, and here's how much faster it is. Here's how much easier it is to administer. To Chris's point, how easy the migration to get it from A to B was. It's really pretty neat, actually, compared to where we meet the vast majority of customers, right? Where we're talking about migrating from other cloud platforms or from 3-tier or what have you. And of course, those things are not fundamentally like for like. So of course, you'd expect that we can really shine there. But here it's like, just change out the part of the software stack that we write and see what the results look like for you, and you'll be impressed.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's kind of redundant with you two guys on here, but I still run into a lot of customers that think, replacing VMware is just a hypervisor question, and it's not. There's so much more here, at least with this comparison. We're talking about folks that are already invested in a hyperconverged stack. There's already that, software-defined storage component. And so you're right. It really gives you an excellent way of highlighting before and after and comparing outcomes. So it'll be interesting to talk to more customers as they adopt this, as they make that migration, and we start to hear some of the before and after stories. So hopefully we get a blog post about that. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. So,
but a cool segue into what the article calls out here, which is that apparently we're only about half done with our planned vSAN ready certifications. So this already is a very extensive list. The article does link out to our support portal with some kind of details around what generations of Dell and HP we support, but apparently lots more goodness to come here as well.
Yeah, I see some other OEMs that come to mind that are on the list today. Today we're talking PowerEdge and ProLiants, but there are certainly other vendors where I know there's work in progress. There were other announcements, particularly around Cisco and support for existing hardware, not necessarily vSAN ready nodes, but lots of reuse stories kind of in the mix right now. So it's a fantastic customer benefiting development, I guess, strategy from the folks at Nutanix. So I kind of love this. I'm like you, Chris. I definitely see the benefits as a former customer, knowing how difficult sometimes it can be to justify those hardware changes. And even my last company, we were pretty progressive. Like, we were refreshing every year and a half and passing down hardware as new generations of things came out. So we were pretty aggressive. But when you definitely sweat your assets longer, this is a huge benefit for you to be able to have this adaptive reuse of existing hardware.
So for other customers listening to that, Philip, was that roughly a 1/3 of the environment every year and a half, so close to a 5-year full life cycle there?
So it's somewhat. The strategy evolved over the years that I was with the firm. The main thing was getting the benefit of the hardware, the new generation of CPUs every time they came out, and putting those under our tier 0 databases and our critical applications. And then that then in turn took that year and a half old hardware, still well within its support life, and moved into tier 1 type applications, primary sort of use cases and hosting, and maybe our VDI stack, or maybe our DMZ, or some other use case. And so by doing that every year and a half, we somewhat stair-stepped our migration process over the course of a 5-year cut. And it definitely gave us some advantages, but we were chasing raw speed sometimes on the processors.
Sure, makes sense. I mean, I can see some advantages for some customers, as it's a neat, at least at the very least, a thought model, if not a practice, around hardware governance, right? Around the team gets more practiced at migration, because you're sort of in some ways always doing a migration, right? Whether it's A to B, B to C, or C back to A, as you sort of rotate around which third of the environment you're thinking about in a given 18-month period. So that's pretty neat. Financially, I can think of that smoothing out a lot of lumps in terms of like giant purchases into more of just sort of a continual buying stream. And somewhat maybe even de-risking stuff like we can think back to some previous generations of like say CPU memory combos where industry-wide, OEM-wide, planet-wide, they're just for like sort of like DIMMs popping off left and right with either true or more commonly false positive health alerts. For some customers, that was their entire 5-year purchase had that condition top to bottom, right? Whereas you kind of had a limited blast radius there of a third of the environment.
And the other benefit that I also found over the years with this was, we, to your point, we were constantly sort of a stream of this, but the software component to it helped us with that ability to continually do migrations. We may take things out of tier one, send them to DR. We were shipping stuff around, and so that was a healthy practice. So yes, we were pretty well tuned to migrations just because of the nature of the company we worked for. But this was another way where migrations were definitely enabled by software. I think if we had a lot of physical machines and we were having to do OS rebuilds and all these other more difficult migration paths, it would be one thing. But with virtualization as that abstraction layer, it certainly bought us the benefits of being able to migrate to new platforms much more easily. And with the HCI model, you now have that benefit even wider, where you may just be able to add nodes and eject nodes. And so you're not even reforming the cluster and doing storage vMotion type activities. You're just growing and shrinking the cluster. And so all of those things kind of come together as the culmination of that simplified operations. And that's an enabler for you to then maybe take that, flatten the curve of the spend on an annual basis versus, having these big 3, 4, 5-year spikes where you have a massive amount of capital going out. And I know every company's different. This is that, do companies still make capital investments? Do they prefer OpEx? And I'm a little bit different and a little tainted, I guess. Not tainted, slanted. I worked for private companies. One was a member-owned cooperative. The other was privately held. And so, yeah, we definitely valued capital investment. And so that's another sort of affecting point, I guess, of the strategy here, is that we were definitely investing from a capital perspective versus, handling this in OpEx. So anyway, I know we just kind of bird walked off, but hopefully that's a good discussion too.
Well, as part of the bird walk, think about this from a customer perspective, from mergers and acquisitions, being able to reuse hardware from acquired companies. That's obviously a big incentive for companies to look at reusing or repurposing the existing gear that they have too. So I think that's a huge factor as far as flexibility, knowing that if there's something that can be reused instead of buying net new, it's definitely a bottom line factor on the financial side.
And I think that's a great culmination of what we're talking about, right? It is that stewardship that we all have as somewhat of a agent of our companies. We have limited resources. We have limited time, limited money, capital resources. We're being good stewards with this, and this is just another choice, another avenue for us to be able to carry that out.
Absolutely.
Guys, this is a fun topic. I think we definitely love the announcement, love the direction, but there's certainly more to come. We were talking just before we kicked off this episode. There's so much great stuff happening, so many great blog posts and stuff going up. So looking forward to digging into the next topic with you guys. And for everybody listening, I want to say thanks for spending a little bit of time with us exploring vSAN ready nodes, being certified for Nutanix. Jirah, Chris, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Pleasure. Yep.
And for everybody listening, we'll see you on the next episode. I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Take care.